Why don't we, is everyone here? Do we have?
I'm here.
I think there's only 4 of us.
Okay.
If you're not here, raise your hand.
Yeah.
All right. We will begin by having our distinguished panelists introduce themselves, and then we will talk about the year in science. So, Steve, you want to start?
Sure. So I'm Steve Kalima. I have a PhD in engineering and have a company that does sensors for infrared detectors and X-ray detectors and stuff like that. And maybe relevant to this panel, do some working with LiDAR.
Courtney, do you want to join us up here?
I'll sneak around you.
He's the ringer in the audience for those tough questions.
Right. Okay. I'm Daniel Dvorkin. I'm a bioinformatics researcher at Anschutz campus. Work in the Altitude Research Center. We study high altitude medicine and hypoxia. I'm a bioinformaticist by training, so I'm the really kind of the quantitative person there. It's a physiology lab, and everybody else is looking at bodies, and I'm looking at things much smaller.
My name is Will McCarthy. I write science fiction and science. I was a contributing editor for Wired magazine for a while, and I was the science columnist for the Sci-Fi Channel back when they still did such things.
Between the wrestling.
And the ghost hunting.
In my copious free time, I have 30 U.S. patents, and I'm not actually sure how many foreign patents I have at this point, but they're all in the field of nanostructured optical materials.
I'm Arlen Feldman. I'm a software engineer and computer book author, and I'm vastly underqualified to be on this panel based on the rest of you guys.
All right. It's it's 2016. It's been a big year. It seems like every year in science is a big year. We always have some big wow discoveries. In fact, there are so many big wow discoveries that I've been compiling a list over the course of the past 24 hours, and I keep thinking, oh yeah, how could I forget about the Proxima Centauri planet? How could I forget about, so it's been one of those years. So why don't we just start, Daniel had an excellent suggestion. We can start, go down the line with something that's in everyone's particular field, and then we can move along to things that are outside our specific specialties. Oh,
Point. And make me start again.
Yes.
All right. Well, so the one I mentioned that I at least feel I know something about is I think you had on your list self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles or whatever. And yeah, I mean that seems to be a very, very big thing. It turns into something like a cell phone revolution where everyone has one. Maybe you won't be allowed to take your car on the freeway unless it has that capability because you consider it too dangerous, or that you're blocking traffic because you can't run 6 inches behind the car in front of you, which the self-driving car could do, at least theoretically. So I think that at least will probably have more impact on people in this room over the next 10 years than anything else.
So in my field, what I actually, I'm a little hesitant to bring this up because it's actually bad news, but there's a silver lining of this cloud. So one of the big stories was the destruction of Ferranoz. And if you don't know about this was a company that came up, made a big splash a few years ago, claiming that they could run hundreds of diagnostic tests on a single little finger stick smear of blood. And it turns out it was basically smoke and mirrors. They made all kinds of claims that turned out to be absolutely unfounded, and it kind of tottered along for a few years, and then this year it completely fell apart. This is very bad and very unfortunate, and a whole lot of people got scammed. The silver lining is that the basic idea, which is that we would not need these enormous samples that we needed in the past, there is an increasing amount coming out. There was a really nice paper that came out very late last year about immunological, single-cell immunological sequencing and expression analysis. And what this means is that they can actually now resolve at the single-cell level how gene expression is changing and the genetic sequence differences in these cells. And this is huge for immunology because, particularly with autoimmune disorders, if you have an autoimmune disorder, it's not your entire immune system attacking your body, it's a part of your immune system that's kind of gone haywire. And so understanding the differences in the different individual immune cells and what the populations are. So what I'm hoping is that Ferranoz self-destruction does not cause everyone to say, oh yeah, you know, that small sample stuff, that's all a load of crap, we know what happened, we got hoodwinked once, we're not going to let it happen again. Because there really is a tremendous potential there. And so, you know, we'll see where that goes. But that was what everyone was talking about, because when they started up, you know, I was a little skeptical at first, and I kind of got on the bandwagon, and I said, this is fantastic, this is amazing, this is revolutionary. And of course it turned out not to be, but the underlying technology and the concepts that they were developing do look like they're going somewhere.
So it almost worked, just not well enough to be viable right now.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not really sure if what Ferranoz was pushing almost worked at all. I mean, the founder, Elizabeth Holmes, who founded the company, she was a Stanford, I want to say, like first-year grad student at Stanford in immunology, and she idolized Steve Jobs. She kind of the black turtleneck. She always wore a black turtleneck, and so she was.
That was the primary feature of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was certainly what got the attention. Right. Was this charismatic young techie, and what she was kind of Jobs without a Wozniak, and so very sad story. I mean, her chief scientist committed suicide when it turned out that this was all going to fall apart. I'm not sure if what she was pushing was almost worked or just didn't work at all, but what the concepts that she was pushing were almost ready for prime time back in like 2009 or so when she started the company. And now, and maybe largely because of all of the publicity Ferranoz got, this single cell or very small sample technology did get a lot of interest and a lot of research, and now we're starting to see that bear fruit.
Interesting. I guess the one that kind of jumps out for me, that's not quite in my field, but it's closely tangential. Most people in this room, I think, are probably familiar with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You can't know with perfect precision the position and momentum of a particle at the same time. In fact, the more precisely you know its position, the more imprecisely you must know its momentum, and that's actually a numerical result. It's not a hazy, fuzzy thing like it sounds. You can actually calculate the limit of your knowledge numerically. But as it turns out, we're now able to fudge that a little bit. There are statistical measurements you can take of a stream of particles that will allow you to make educated guesses about the unknown variable that have much better than chance of being correct. And so this allows us to kind of get back at the universe. It's sort of
Take that, universe.
Yeah, exactly. It keeps some information to itself that it won't let us have, but we're able to cheat a little bit and get some of that information back. That's a tremendous result, and I don't think that anyone's really thought through the implications of that, but I think that they must be pretty profound.
So is this some kind of estimate the error and then apply the error as a correction, or what's the...
You know, it's very esoteric, and
Okay.
I'm not going to wade in for fear of being incorrect. The point is that if you know a fair bit about the stream of particles that you're measuring, then you can defeat Heisenberg for that particular stream of particles.
So more probability in physics. That's what I was really looking for myself.
Well, I mean, that's fascinating because there are numerical analysis techniques. I mean, those have been known for a long time, right? Where you estimate the error and then you apply the error as a kind of correction. And you kind of that. I mean, I didn't think that was possible with particles, but I guess no one else did either, right? Until it was.
Oh, well, I actually have two. If
That's okay.
Sure.
They're both, you know, bad good type things. One sort of relates to what you were talking about with self-driving cars, but specialized artificial intelligence. So not general, you know, Skynet telling us all we have, you know, at least a year or two to wait. But specialized artificial intelligence that's doing a particular thing. Yeah, this is sort of the year where it's everywhere. I mean, you buy, you know, sales tools and they have it now. And the reason it's bad is this lovely thought of creative destruction, where people who really thought their jobs were going to be completely safe, truck drivers, but now lawyers, HR people, writers. There are systems now. There's a company that wrote 1.5 billion articles using artificial intelligence. There's even a movie now where the script was written by artificial intelligence. I will say it was a terrible movie. It was actually really fascinating, but it made no sense whatsoever. But you know that that's coming.
So Michael Bay is an AI, is that
Took an award at Cannes.
Very, very specialized. Explosion calculation.
right?
So on the one hand, I think it's going to have a huge opportunity to change the world in a lot of ways that are good, but it's also in the short term going to have a big impact. Also, algorithms are getting themselves into a lot of places where they might not necessarily be good. For example, in crime analysis, where, oh, it's great, the algorithms will figure out where we should investigate. Well, we have been investigating this particular neighborhood for some unknown reason. I can't imagine why this particular neighborhood might be one. So the algorithms say, well, this is the neighborhood you should go to because this is where you come to define crime. And pick your, you know, your social trope as to why that area might be. You see a lot of that that's a big problem right now. The other one is what I refer to, not everyone else calls it something else, but I call it the Internet of Insecure Things. There have been a couple of, everyone's talking about light bulbs that have, you know, that are computer controlled, and your DVRs and your routers. Well, it turns out that none of them are particularly secure, and we've had a couple of really big botnet attacks where the bots are actually things like security cameras and light bulbs and you name it, toasters is the one I heard yesterday.
Also hacking cars in motion.
Oh yeah.
So far only demonstrations, you know, to alert people to the security risks, but it is in fact possible to hack the brakes and the accelerator of a modern vehicle in motion.
Yeah. Never mind a car that's entirely driven by.
Well, that would probably be a little more secure.
You would think that, but what's really scary about a lot of these attacks against these devices is that they've looked at the code, and it's really, really terrible code. It's just that the devices are so unbelievably secure, and there's no way. How do you get a patch update to your light bulbs? You know, there's no really good way of doing that.
So is there really enough intelligence in a light bulb to
They have a web server,
There's enough to ping
full computer system in there. Yeah, I mean, if you think about, you know, the Raspberry Pi, Arduino type things, I mean, there's smaller versions of that. You have a full-blown computer in there running, and
well, there's a computer, but it doesn't have much memory in it.
How much memory do you need to have to do a botnet attack? You know, or you know, they had 150,000 devices involved in the last attack. The other thing, by the way, about self-driving cars is people are now worried that people are actually going to algorithmically attack them, because if the cars can, you know, a human being doesn't have to stop if you run out in the road. A self-driving car is going to. So whereas pedestrians generally are smart enough not to run out in the road, well, if I want to get across the road, I know the cars are going to stop. I can just run out the road and make everyone, you know, make all of the cars screech go home for me. So.
Yeah, we have to get to a lot larger penetration.
Yes,
Right.
probably a little while.
But like you said, if at some point it becomes mandatory, then, you know.
Yeah. Maybe hire regular drivers to run over people.
You allow road cars.
There was I wanted to follow up on the data mining algorithm thing that you were talking about. You know, this is something that kind of irritates me. I mean, there's in bioinformatics, there's three ways that people come to bioinformatics. One is from cell and molecular biology, one is from computer science, and one is from biostatistics. And biostatistics is pretty much where I came from. And of course now people are talking about data science and as this separate thing, which to me is just computational statistics, but not done very well. And one of the things that we're very aware of in classical statistics is the dangers of overfitting your model. In other words, you can take any data set and you can generate a model that will predict that data set perfectly from that data set. And you have to really think about the variance. You're not trying to create a model for that data set. You're trying to create a general model that describes that kind of data. And one of the things that I see in a lot of these data mining algorithms is, oh, we threw a bunch of data at this data mining algorithm and it created this model, and great, go with it. And there's no real testing of how generalizable it is.
Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to do out-of-sample testing, right?
Yeah.
The problem is that the calculations are so complicated that people don't know
Right.
what the model is.
Exactly, it's a black box,
Yes.
and that's a real problem.
The example I was used to use, this is years ago when neural networks were all the rage, and the military was trying to build algorithms to locate tanks. And so they took all of these pictures of a place without tanks, and then they took a bunch of pictures where there were tanks, and then the algorithm was supposed to figure out which ones had tanks in them. And it was perfect. After it had been trained for a while, it got them all. And then they ran a new set of data through it, and it was completely garbage. It turned out the algorithm had figured out, hey, they took the tank pictures on a sunny day, and the non-tank pictures on a dim day, so we had a perfect way of detecting whether a picture was dim or not. Well, but they could figure out what was happening then. The algorithms are so much more complicated now that they just have no idea why they are picking the patterns they're picking.
Yeah, and if you're putting things like, bomb this area, if you're putting
Right.
judgments like that in that model's hands, you better be pretty confident about it.
Stephen, you want to throw out another science item? Perhaps further from your specialty?
Further from my specialty.
It doesn't have to
I don't know if it's totally a science item, but certainly in the news was all the cheating on the emissions for cars.
Yeah.
In the automotive.
be. Oh, don't get me started. I'm one of the victims of that.
You're
scheme.
right. Well, that's we can talk about it. So you're going to get lots of money back?
Yeah, until they tell us what the repair is going to be, it's all very hypothetical. They say you can take a buyback on somewhat crappy terms, or we can fix it on somewhat good terms, but they haven't said what the repair is. It's probably the lobotomy.
Yeah, well, something that will make your car very slow and use lots of gas, or diesel in this case.
There are two ways to fix that problem. Number one is to put a urea tank on the catalytic converter, which costs money. The other one is to lobotomize the computer, which doesn't. Guess which one Volkswagen prefers?
I have to admit, I got a little scared. I got a recall notice on my Nissan. No issue with Nissans or anything, but it said there may be some minor calculation problems in the emissions that are detected. I'm thinking, really? What could that be?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
it's really widespread at this point, right? I mean, practically every automaker is on
That's
this.
really
Probably
that's
to
why
some
you
level.
didn't hear so much about the other automakers didn't jump up and say, oh, we would never do that.
Yeah, but I think that's a little bit unfair though, because at least there's extremely good evidence that Volkswagen was absolutely intending to cheat.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Detecting that it was being tested and totally reconfiguring the way the emissions work. Whereas I can see that most of the others say, well, we're going to optimize our stuff so it works best under the conditions of testing, which of course it does, and it doesn't work quite as well on the others. But at least they weren't, specifically trying to detect the test and turn it off. when
Yeah,
it's not being tested.
hopefully.
I think there's a big difference there. I don't think it's fair to paint all the other manufacturers in the same broad brush.
Well, I do.
You want everyone else to suffer like yourself.
Moving out of the automotive realm a little bit, another kind of big finding this year in the realm of physics, the Large Hadron Collider has really failed to uncover any evidence whatsoever of supersymmetry. Supersymmetry we have this thing in physics called the standard model, which basically says this is how everything works. And the standard model has held up very, very well under every kind of test that can be thrown at it. The problem is the standard model presumes supersymmetry, which means that there are larger, heavier versions of all the particles that we know. That's kind of how the math all works out. The problem is that the Large Hadron Collider is now capable of searching in those energies. It's finding nothing, which means that supersymmetry is not true, which means that in some creepy fundamental way the standard model is not true, even though it gives the right answers for everything except the existence of these large particles. So this is something that it was hoped when they started up the Large Hadron Collider, the hope was that it would throw physics into disarray. With the Higgs boson, that didn't happen. Well, yeah, we found the Higgs boson, it's right where we thought it was going to be next, but the problem is the next thing didn't happen. So it finally has thrown physics into disarray. Hallelujah.
Well, are they thinking it's a limited case scenario where the standard model is now just going to be a limited case for something more basic?
Perhaps, but I mean, you could say the same thing about epicycles. People used to model orbits as circles with epicycles.
Well, yeah, but I mean, historically, everything becomes a limited case of something discovered further on.
I don't think that that's, I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure that that's always the case. You can, in fact, model elliptical orbits by adding ever larger numbers of epicycles, but that doesn't give you any insight into what's actually going on there. Whereas the elliptical orbit, which is a completely different thing, actually represents what's going on. I'm talking about planets here, in case I just made a jump there. I apologize.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the kind of the canonical example of the special case, it's a special case of something bigger is Newtonian mechanics as opposed to relativistic mechanics. Sure, we live in a Newtonian world. Most of the time, Newtonian calculations are just fine, whereas epicycles will eventually always steer you wrong.
Yeah.
Right.
I knew the GPS in my car was having trouble for a reason.
Yeah.
It's a really old
Was
bubble.
it planned by the Vatican? Program by the Vatican?
I'll jump in with one more thing and then maybe kick it back over to Daniel. Alzheimer's disease. Raise your hand if you're afraid of Alzheimer's disease. I don't think that any disease in America strikes terror into our hearts quite as much as that one, except perhaps cancer. But all cancer does is kill you. Alzheimer's changes who you are slowly and agonizingly. So my 16-year-old daughter is afraid of Alzheimer's disease. The good news is she's never going to get it. There are good clinical results this year. I shouldn't say clinical. There are animal model results that show that there are easily producible molecules that will clear amyloid beta plaques from the brain of a mouse. They cross the blood-brain barrier and they directly attack the plaque. There's probably still some root cause. There's some inflammatory mechanism that's creating those plaques in the first place. And I'm not saying that the work is done, but there's people who've been nibbling at the edges of Alzheimer's disease for a long time. I think that this was the big year where they're able to clear the physical manifestations of Alzheimer's disease from the brains of mice and restore neural function to what it had been prior to the plaques being there. I'm not going to call that a cure for Alzheimer's disease any more than insulin is a cure for diabetes. But it looks like we're going to have a treatment for Alzheimer's disease available for humans in 10 years. I think that's a reasonable projection.
So Werner Ringe's story based on that of someone being cured of Alzheimer's and after not being able to interact with the world hardly for 10 or 15 years, ends up having to go to school with his grandchildren to learn
How the world
technology.
works, yes.
Well, I hope you're right. I really do. I will say, as always, there's the word of caution about animal models. About 10 years ago, I worked on a study called Forte, which was feasibility of retinoic acid in treatment of emphysema. Retinoic acid is already a human-approved drug, Retin-A, it's an acne drug. And there were some wonderful results in mice for treatment of emphysema. If you are a mouse, smoke all you want. We can totally fix your lungs. Unfortunately, in human, it was tremendous. I mean, it had like a 90% success rate in mice, and of course, obviously, we haven't done that in humans. But that doesn't mean all animal models are wrong, and I really hope that. I mean, absolutely, I think Alzheimer's is about the scariest thing that can happen to your body. There's lots of horrible, scary things that can happen to your body, but that one changes, as you said, it changes you. One bit of just unreservedly good news as far as I'm concerned, and probably, at least a third of the people in the room know exactly where I'm going with this. Just a few days ago, they announced the discovery of the first piece of fossilized dinosaur brain. This is tremendous. This is wonderful. This is fantastic. A couple of big things that they've learned already. Obviously, they're going to be looking at this specimen for years to come. One of the really neat things that they learned is that dinosaur brains took up most of the brain case, more of the brain case than they had thought previously. Most of the previous models, this is my understanding, of how large their brains were based on crocodilian brains, which there's a fair amount of cushioning, there's a fair amount of fluid and soft tissue in there. These look like they actually, more unsurprisingly, more like bird brains, which take up almost all of the available space because birds just don't waste space. But the dinosaur this came from was an iguanodont, big, basically, I kind of think of it as a dinosaur equivalent to a cow. So it was not a small, fast-moving, active creature, and yet it seemed to use almost all of the skull. And of course, they're learning a lot about the structure. This is an amazing fossil. Nobody's ever gotten this lucky before. So I think we're going to learn a whole lot. And again, I mean, this one specimen is probably going to be one of the most thoroughly examined fossils in history. So I think that just makes me happy.
Another one in the medical world, another thing that's been very worrying has been, and it's still very worrying, is drug-resistant bacteria. And speaking as someone who gets infections a lot, I mean, I get very worried about that because we're getting to the point where they're estimating that antibiotics are going to stop working at some point in the not too terribly distant future, at least for a lot of situations. This year they've got some really interesting studies with nanoparticles. So these are light activated quantum dots. I love that expression. I don't think they're really quantum, but where they've actually effectively killed bacteria. And previously they've done stuff with heavy metals that worked, and they killed the bacteria while they were killing you. These, they can target them and they can actually change their structure using light. Now, one minor problem is it works great if you've got bacteria on your skin. Getting a light bright enough to get the ones going for your liver might be a little bit trickier, but...
Actually, something very similar, and perhaps even more promising, there are some microparticles, probably 1,000 times larger than the particles Arlen is talking about. They're star-shaped, and they're just kind of sized perfectly so that they're able to wreak terrible violence on the membrane of a bacterial cell, and they do almost nothing to the cells in a human being, or in a mouse, I guess I should say. But amazingly enough, they injected mice with these microparticles, and the microparticles did very little to the mouse, but they did great violence to the bacterial populations living in these mice. This is something that in the paper that I read, they thought it was extremely unlikely that the bacteria would ever be able to evolve resist. Now, that's take with a huge grain of salt, but at least it could put us way ahead in the arms race with bacteria. And it's a purely mechanical solution. There's no chemical intoxication that causes this effect.
Was that effect localized or was that systemic?
I think the idea was that it was systemic. They had localized infections in the mice, but I believe they were injecting the mice systemically. So very exciting concept. We might all have these circulating in our blood 20 years from now.
The obvious question is, what does this do to the rest of your microbiome? How targeted is it? That's the big. Yeah, I mean, I want to say actually, There's been a lot of sensationalism about antibiotic resistance, and people have been talking about the end of the age of antibiotics and so on. It's a very serious problem. Okay, it's a huge, huge health problem. It's terrifying because for 50 years or more, we've assumed that bacterial infections were almost always treatable, and now, of course, they're not. That being said, I don't think that we are going to reach the point where all the antibiotics stop working on everything ever. You know, what it does mean is that we have to be really, really careful about what antibiotics we use for what infections, and we need to test for resistance before we oh, you have such and such an infection, here's such and such a pill.
Stop giving them to healthy pigs.
Yeah,
God,
exactly.
yes. And God knows, yeah, any other solutions that we can get are terrific. So yeah, that's a good thing.
I just love the fact that there are opportunities appearing. It's not, oh well, you know, that's too bad. Good luck with whatever you got.
Yeah, right.
You have anything else for us, Stephen?
Certainly one that we just had a panel on today, the discovery of gravity waves. I think
Right.
that's a huge discovery, and it does confirm Einstein's theory of general relativity. And our presenter thought that maybe it at least has a little insight on the possibility of a warp drive, and that's probably pushing it pretty far.
It works great. You just take two black holes, put them in your spaceship.
The parts store has been out of those.
Try Amazon.
I think the poetry of that I find to be really impressive. The collision of two black holes is such a tremendous event that 1 billion years later the universe is still ringing in a way that we can hear. It's amazing.
Yeah. It did take some very impressive engineering work though to build the detector. Yeah, it was.
No doubt. Also in the field of astronomy, people have been finding more and more Earth-sized planets within the range from the star where liquid water could exist. And this year we found one around Proxima Centauri, which is the closest star. So from a science fiction standpoint, you couldn't ask for a better gift than that. There's a planet in what's called the Goldilocks zone that is of the right size to potentially be habitable. It's around a red dwarf star, which means that it has a good chance of being tidally locked, the same way that the moon is tidally locked to the Earth. Does that make it uninhabitable? Probably not. But it certainly would make it complicated. The other problem with red dwarf stars is that they tend to kick out a lot of very nasty flares. So there'd be a lot of radiation flux on this planet that we don't have here on Earth.
Seems like I read something about that only happens with the younger red dwarfs, and this is a very old red dwarf.
Oh, do they eventually settle down?
Yes.
I hadn't heard that. That's good to know.
You buy a station wagon and...
Yeah. Move out to the burbs.
Have you heard about the StarChip? So it's great that there's a potentially hospitable planet merely 4.3 light years away, but unfortunately we can't travel at the speed of light. But some people have come up with a plan for what's called the make sure I get their name right, but it's the StarChips spacecraft. They're spacecraft that are a couple of centimeters in size. Just have basically they have a radioactive core and a solar sail that's about 16 square meters that can travel something like 15 to 20% of the speed of light. So 20, 30 years from now, they can actually get to Alpha Centauri and find out about the whole,
Snap a very quick photo as they zoom by.
and then, but 4 years after they get there, we'll actually get a message back saying, not much there, but here's...
I can certainly believe that they could build something with that size with good sensors and whatever else, but communications, I mean, if it's got to send a signal back, that's going to be a pretty powerful transmitter.
They
Or a
claim...
very sensitive receiver.
Yeah.
And in the nearer term than that, even the next generation of space telescopes will be able to get good spectral readings on the atmosphere of that planet and let us know. It's easy to tell. No one's ever done it, but it should be easy to tell whether there's life on a planet or not. Significant amounts of life, at least, because the atmosphere will be way out of homeostasis. There will be excessive amounts of oxygen or excessive amounts of chlorine or excessive amounts of methane that should be quickly depleted by physical processes. People say that about Mars. Mars's atmosphere isn't in homeostasis. Well, maybe that means there's life on Mars. There's not really enough of an atmosphere there, I think, to be a good model. It doesn't take very much belching of methane from somewhere, from some process, to throw those percentages off. But if we see a planet with a good thick atmosphere that's not CO2 like Venus, then that would be a very good indication that something's actively messing with it.
Yeah, we also discovered there's 10 times more galaxies than we thought.
You want to talk about that?
Sure, I don't think we're going to get to many of them either, but it's interesting. It's like, I just thought we'd figured out what I mean, there's already too much stuff to figure out what's going on, but I don't have much to add beyond the headline there.
It does. Somebody posted to my Facebook a little while ago a meme that showed some Hubble shot and Hubble Deep Field shot and said, given the size of the universe, it's nearly certain that there are space battles going on somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, you know,
They have actually, they've simplified the Drake equation, partially because of X. So the Drake equation is this equation by a guy named Drake that calculated the odds of there being intelligent life somewhere in the universe.
In the galaxy specifically.
Yeah. Well, one of the big unknowns was whether there were planets around stars. Well, now we know there are, and now we know that some of them have atmosphere. So the odds, they also did something kind of interesting where instead of calculating the odds of there being life, they calculated the odds of there not being life. And when you sort of reverse the math, it's like, well, it would be really, really, really unlikely. Now, whether they exist while we're around at the same time, you know, we haven't actually figured out how long a civilization may last. But November 8th might tell us.
You know, the other neat thing about the red dwarf thing, and I think that most of the new Earth-sized exoplanet discoveries have been around red dwarfs, is that red dwarfs last a really, really long time. I mean, I think the expected lifespan of the sun is something like 7 billion years, and you know, which means we're a little more than halfway through. Whereas red dwarfs are around for hundreds of billions of years, which means there'd be multiple opportunities for life to evolve and civilizations to arise. And, yeah, that may not do us a whole lot of good, but somewhere out there, there's something. You know, I think that really increases the odds.
Closer to home, this is one that I think gets reported every year, but it gets incrementally better and better. Very black materials. When you look at black, when you look at a material like this tablecloth here, it's actually reflecting quite a bit of light, so that you can see sort of a sheen off of the surface of it. This might be reflecting 85% of the light that hits it. But there are materials now that that absorb more than 99% of the light that hit it, and that fraction gets smaller and smaller every year. I would love to see one of these materials in person. I never have, but I understand that they drink in light. They look like an absence.
Like a black hole.
Right. Black holes. That's another interesting thing that happened this year. There are analogs to black holes. There's an acoustic black hole that was demonstrated this year. It was predicted many years before, but someone has demonstrated you can produce an acoustic black hole that sound waves go into it and they don't come back out, except that there's some equivalent of Hawking radiation that lets energy out, even though the original sound waves are lost. And then there's another analog that exists only on the surfaces of semiconductor materials. There's a sort of a black hole on the surfaces of materials that are very cold. You get a lot of exotic states of matter. In the bulk you do too, but especially on the surfaces. And there's a thing called the Majorana particle, which is its own antiparticle, except that it's not really a particle. And it's also shown some black hole-like characteristics. So I don't know what that does for us, but it's interesting.
Well, I mean, you can tell me if this makes any sense at all. what we think of black holes, if that's actually kind of a special case of some kind of general phenomenon. You said like with the acoustic black hole that there's some analog to Hawking radiation. I mean that speaks to me of a special case of something.
Exactly. No, I think it does say that black hole is a thing that can manifest in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Well, we've got about, I'm sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, no.
So,
We have 10 minutes left. I was going to throw it open to questions from the audience.
on the acoustic black hole, is it gravity-based as well?
No.
Do we know what the propagator of it is, if that's the right word?
You know, I don't want to say more than I know about this. Mostly what I see are the headline level details.
Okay.
I haven't read
It
any of
sounds really
the
interesting.
technical papers on that.
So something to keep in mind with all of this stuff we're talking about. My program director, when I was in grad school, he had this thing he said where whenever he read anything in his field, he would headlines in his field in pop science reporting, he'd be like, "Oh my God, this is a load of crap. They got it all wrong." And when he read it in other fields, he'd say, "Oh, this is so cool. This is going to keep the world forever." And then he thought, "Wait a minute. There are people reading this right now who are,
But this is a tabletop apparatus. It's not, it's not in outer space, and it's not in giant pressure vessels or anything like that.
But one thing I will say, because this is in my field, there's been a lot of talk about whether Moore's law I can't say it in American, I'm sorry, is finally winding down. There's a lot of evidence to say that is not the case. There's so much stuff. There's work on just, there's a 5D data storage stuff. This is not quite related to Moore's law, but 5D data storage that's supposed to last for billions of years, that you can store on a 1-inch disk, you can store 360 terabytes. And
But is it secure?
well, it is secure because,
How much of that is porn?
Not 350 terabytes.
Well, the scary thing with all of these storage metaphors is we'll store everything on it, and 50 years from now, no one will have a machine that can read it. So, yes, it will survive for 3 billion years, and no one will know what it is. There's also a terabyte SD card now, so for your camera, you can finding your film on it. They've also in Sweden, Nokia's got terabit fiber. They've proven actually so. We won't get it in America for another, 700 years. But terabit fiber, the example they gave, which I thought was kind of nice, is you could download the entire HD version of Game of Thrones in less than a second. And Sweden will probably have it rolled out everywhere, and we'll be lucky if we get 56K CenturyLink. But they've got 1 nanometer transistors now. That the proof of concept, which no one. They've shown that carbon nanotubes are now faster than silicon. There was all this excitement that carbon nanotubes were going to be the next generation, but no one could make them pure enough. Well, now they've figured out a way. It's not manufacturer ready yet, but now we're looking at 7 nanometer stuff. Now is sort of the absolute state of the art. Now they're looking at stuff that's getting down to the molecule level of things, which is kind of, so there's all of this stuff going on that is just, there's even quantum, Oxford actually showed that they can make a quantum logic gate for a computer that's almost reliable enough to put in a computer, which is a big step up from where we've been. I mean, because it's 99.9% reliable, which if you think about the number of operations a computer does a second, not very reliable. But it's a major proof of concept. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the computer world.
More questions?
Yeah, I think I heard that. I now believe that Pluto has an inner ocean, and if it does, that would imply that there could be life there.
Life requires an energy source, so you'd have to wonder what was
Gravity.
Well, if it has an ocean, there must be an energy source that's keeping the temperature up, which, certainly radioactive decay in the core could do that.
Fair enough.
Very slow life.
Yeah.
And of course, we've got a ninth planet, a new ninth planet.
Oh, we already have a name.
Yes.
But this one's supposed to be larger than the Earth.
Yes.
I think you should call it Pluto.
Yeah. No, if they confirm that, I think that'll be huge because, of course, we know so little about the outer solar system. We know that it's out there and occasionally it throws things at us,
Yeah.
and that's about all we know.
Until they get a picture of it, I'm not really, gonna believe.
Pixar, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But the point is well taken that if you can have a subterranean ocean on Pluto, you can have one literally anywhere.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anyone else? Yes?
You were talking about the black fabric and developing blacker black. Why?
Theater.
Well, I was going to say James Cameron films, but
Well, the quick and
fact that
easy
they're
answer
doing
is solar
resources work.
energy.
Oh, okay.
Solar energy conversion. If the less light you're losing, the more light you're able to convert. Now, I think once your conversion efficiency, once you're drinking in 99.9% of the light, that extra 0.1% I don't think is going to do you a lot of good. So I guess beyond a certain point, it's just because it's cool.
It's the emo defense.
Hot Topic is paying.
I would so buy a car made of.
It's gonna be the
If you're trying to
best
make
jacket,
a,
keeps you
a
warm.
stealth, spaceship or something like that, though, it would be useful.
Yeah, because it would be anti-photography to a certain extent.
Apparently the Chinese, so one of the problems with solar cells is they don't tend to work very well if it's not sunny. The Chinese have just early testing on a coating, I think it's graphene, a coating on solar cells that generate electricity from rain. So if it's sunny or raining, it's not very efficient and they kind of have to pour salt water on at the moment. So it's a few little, but they're...
Like piezoelectric using the
I
impact
guess,
of the raindrops?
yeah. I mean,
That'd be pretty cool.
they're saying it's like 7% efficient or something.
In the future, I think that we will be scavenging energy from all kinds of little tiny sources. It'll be just a normal function of our clothes and our walls and our shoes.
They just had a new material that they could put solar cells on a soap bubble, which isn't particularly useful, but that implies they could put it on anything.
Right.
Back there?
The line of the absolute black, though, what does that do to your mind when you look at it?
I hear it looks pretty strange.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a wall, a solar panel wall that's almost absolute black, would you not have psychological issues with people looking at it?
Well, I think you have a more practical issue of people walking into it.
I was about to say really unhappy birds. Yeah.
If it's absolutely black, you can't really see where it is because there's nothing for your eye to focus on.
I would be willing to bet we might have a problem with it. People who grew up with it wouldn't. I mean, there are so many. Think about so many features of the modern world that would look utterly bizarre to anyone who was not alive when they were introduced. And
Science fiction convention.
Back of the room.
You're talking about solar cells. Apparently now there's a carbon nanotube-based optical retina that just directly rectifies optical frequency energy into electricity.
That's not a new idea.
It's apparently been produced.
I'd like to hear more about that. There are a lot of things that are supposed to work. I remember one that was made out of microdiodes that was supposed to have a similar, a microdiode array, but it didn't work at all. If this actually works, that would be important, yes.
Yeah, that kind of thing has been shown to work in the microwave and the millimeter wave region, and getting it to shorter and shorter wavelengths has been ongoing research. So yeah, eventually we get there.
You just gave us the signal.
Oh, all right. I guess we're done.
The signal.
Whoops. Thank you, everyone.